Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're jumping straight into a story that completely rewrites how we think about ancient global power. I mean, it really challenges everything we're typically taught about the age of exploration. When we think of vast ocean-spanning empires, we usually picture European armadas from centuries later, right? The Spanish galleons or the British East India Company. But long before any of that, a completely different maritime superpower was dominating the globe. Today we're mapping out the epic rise and fall of the Chola Empire. We're going to trace exactly how an obscure, nearly forgotten River Valley dynasty transformed into an unprecedented naval juggernaut that literally controlled the entire Indian Ocean. Get ready, because the sheer scale of their ambition and how completely it reshapes our understanding of history is absolutely incredible.
So, let's dive into this by traveling back to 9th century South India. If you looked at a map back then, it was a dark, highly chaotic time defined by fierce political struggle. You had these heavily established kingdoms like the Cheras, the Pandyas, and the Pallavas just constantly clashing for dominance, soaking the soil in endless warfare. And then, caught right in the middle of all this chaos, you had the ancient Cholas. Now, the Cholas weren't exactly new. They actually had this glorious ancient past celebrated in old Sangam literature. But by the 9th century, well, their power had faded so drastically that they were practically forgotten. They were pushed to the quiet banks of the Kaveri River, living as mere subordinates. It honestly looked like history had just closed the book on them. Which brings us to a really profound historical mystery. How do you go from being a forgotten footnote to conquering the ocean?
The answer starts with one incredibly ambitious warrior taking calculated advantage of the chaos around him. Starting from absolute obscurity, a leader named Vijayalaya noticed that the dominant Pallavas and Pandyas were completely exhausting themselves fighting each other. So, in 850 CE, he makes a daring move. He seizes the strategic, highly fortified city of Thanjavur, and this wasn't just a simple military victory, it was a total masterstroke. Capturing Thanjavur gave the Cholas direct control over the extraordinarily fertile Kaveri Delta. That delta essentially became the agricultural engine that would fund all their future wars and grand ambitions. And just look at the rapid succession of conquest that followed. His son, Aditya I, dealt a crushing definitive blow to the Pallavas, moving the Cholas from an emerging threat right to the center of political power. By the early 10th century, under Parantaka I, they were rapidly expanding their borders. Boom! The Cholas were officially back, and they were shocking the entire subcontinent.
But, rapid expansion almost always leads to devastating pushback, and the Cholas were no exception. They eventually suffered some massive, crushing defeats, most notably at the Battle of Takalam against the powerful Rashtrakutas. That was a huge blow that severely crippled their momentum and really threatened to end their resurgence right then and there. So here's the fascinating part. It wasn't military might that saved them. Their secret to survival was their groundbreaking, highly decentralized administration. It's like a giant, perfectly tuned administrative puzzle. They used a sophisticated system of village councils, historically known as the Or and the Saba, which actually empowered locals to manage their own taxation, justice, and infrastructure. They even used an advanced election system called Kudavolai, where names were drawn from a pot to elect representatives. Imagine that. Combine this with meticulous land measurement and massive water management projects, and you get an incredibly resilient society. Because these local committees functioned independently, the economy just kept humming along smoothly, effectively saving the empire from total collapse, even when the central military was in deep crisis.
That brilliant administrative bedrock is exactly what set the stage for an explosive imperial resurgence. The empire's momentum violently accelerates as we hit 985 CE. A young, battle-tested prince named Arumulji Varman takes the throne. He'd grown up gaining intensive combat experience while deeply studying his dynasty's administrative systems. He's crowned as Rajaraja Chola I, and it is no exaggeration to say that the moment he put on that crown, the destiny of South Asia changed forever. He wasn't just another warrior king fighting over the same patches of dirt. He was a true visionary strategist. He recognized that to build an unstoppable, immortal empire, you had to think much, much bigger than the land you could walk on.
To really get this, we have to contrast the traditional focus of Indian warfare at the time with Rajaraja's grand vision. The old way was almost entirely locked into land boundaries, squabbling with neighboring kingdoms for incremental regional control. Rajaraja definitely did some of that. He conquered the rival Pandyas and Cheras to secure his home base in the south, but he realized the true future of infinite power and unimaginable wealth wasn't on land, it was maritime dominance. Instead of just looking north for more dirt, he looked across the open ocean. He launched a massive, unprecedented campaign to capture northern Sri Lanka and started building a colossal, heavily armed navy. He fundamentally shifted the empire's gaze and its entire economic strategy straight to the sea.
This maritime pivot was a real game changer.
It turned the Chola Empire into an absolute economic juggernaut. As their formidable navy systematically secured pirate-infested waters, immense merchant guilds started forming. Organizations like the Ayanur Var acted almost like massive, ancient multinational corporations. They wielded immense power and trading clout. We're talking moving highly sought-after textiles and precious gems to China, and trading for Arabian horses and raw metals in the West. Over in the East, they locked down lucrative routes for spices and ivory. By monopolizing these vital sea routes and ensuring heavily guarded safe passage for merchants, the Chola royal treasury just began to overflow. The wealth is hard to even comprehend. Suddenly, the scale of their economic influence was stretching thousands of miles beyond India's shores, literally dictating the terms of global trade.
So what do you do with all that boundless wealth? Well, you build a legacy out of stone so no one ever forgets your name. To show off this unprecedented prosperity, Rajaraja commissioned the magnificent Brihadiswara temple in his capital city of Thanjavur. Just think about this for a second. The central tower is 216 feet tall, built using massive blocks of solid granite, which, by the way, isn't even naturally found anywhere near the city. To get the 80-ton granite capstone to the very top of that towering structure, engineers had to construct a gradual earthen ramp stretching for several miles just to drag the stone into place. Even today, architects look at this temple and are totally baffled by how it was constructed over 1,000 years ago. It stands as an absolute engineering marvel, a towering symbol of a civilization at its absolute peak. Now let's fast forward to 1014 CE. If you thought Rajaraja was ambitious, wait until his son Rajendra Chola I officially takes power. If the father laid the unshakable foundation of a superpower, the son decided to stretch it to the absolute limits of the known world. Rajendra was fiercely, ruthlessly ambitious. In a military move you rarely see in South Indian history, he marched his vast, heavily armed army thousands of kilometers north. They tore through rival kingdoms all the way up to Bengal, ultimately conquering the banks of the sacred Ganges River. And to immortalize this, he didn't just plant a flag. No way. He forced the defeated northern kings to carry water from the Ganges back south on their heads, literally building a brand new capital city named the City of the Chola, who conquered the Ganges. I mean, that is just an unbelievable flex of imperial power. But honestly, Rajendra's most jaw-dropping achievement wasn't even on land. In 1025 CE, he executes an operation of sheer, unbelievable audacity. At the time, the powerful Srivijaya Empire, over in modern-day Indonesia and Malaysia, controlled the incredibly vital maritime choke points between India and China, specifically the Malacca Strait. Rajendra wanted absolute, uncontested control of that global trade pipeline. So what does he do? He launches thousands of seasoned soldiers on massive warships straight across the open waters of the Bay of Bengal. They cross the strait and systematically dismantle Srivijaya's heavily fortified strategic ports. Just think about the mind-boggling logistics of launching a massive amphibious invasion across an ocean in the 11th century. It requires perfect timing, advanced navigation, and terrifying military discipline. It's rightfully considered one of the greatest naval operations in all of ancient history. The success of that astonishing campaign created an incredible geopolitical reality. The Indian Ocean effectively became a Chola lake. Under Rajendra's rule, the empire reached its absolute zenith. Indian merchant ships could now safely travel all the way from Arabia to Southeast Asia and China without any interference. But it's absolutely crucial to remember that it wasn't just economic goods moving across these shipping lanes, it was entire cultures. The Cholas heavily influenced the art, the political administration, and the religious structures of Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and vast swaths of Southeast Asia. That's exactly why, even today, you can see deep traces of Hindu and Buddhist architectural blending and Tamil linguistics all across Southeast Asia, from ancient temple ruins in Indonesia to enduring cultural traditions in Bali. This was the true golden age of their international diplomatic and cultural power. However, as we see time and time again, no empire expands forever. They eventually fell victim to classic imperial overstretch. Maintaining an empire spanning multiple continents and oceans takes an incredible and ultimately unsustainable amount of continuous effort, blood, and money. The horrific turning point arrived in 1054 CE. Rajadiraja Chola I,
Rajendra's successor, was directly leading his troops from atop a war elephant against the rival Western Chalukyas at the brutal Battle of Kapam. Tragically, he was killed right there in the thick of the battlefield. Now, even though the fiercely loyal Chola army pushed forward and actually won that specific battle, his death marked a grim, irreversible threshold. It signaled the beginning of centuries of continuous, exhausting, and highly draining wars simply to maintain the borders their ancestors had so ambitiously drawn. Over the next 2 centuries, the Central Power slowly collapsed under its own massive weight. They were simply unable to defend such impossibly vast territories while multiple existential threats emerged at the exact same time. You had the Hoysala dynasty rapidly rising in power to the west, constantly chipping away at Chola influence. Simultaneously, the Pandyas, the very dynasty the Cholas had subjugated centuries earlier, staged a brutal, vengeful resurgence. All these constant, unending wars severely depleted the once overflowing Chola treasury. And you know how it goes. When the money dries up, local leaders and vassal states start breaking away. The central authority in Thanjavur just withered. Finally, around 1279 CE, the last independent Chola ruler was decisively defeated, and this once mighty maritime empire quietly faded into history.
But true greatness isn't measured just by how long an empire's political borders last, is it? It's measured by the permanent marks it leaves on the human story. The Cholas emphatically proved that ancient India wasn't just a power of the land, but an absolute master of the global seas. Their innovations in administration, their staggering architectural triumphs, and their unparalleled naval strategy reshaped the entire Eastern Hemisphere. It really makes you wonder, if a dynasty from the riverbanks of South India could build a naval armada that controlled the globe's busiest oceans, what other highly advanced ancient titans has our history simply forgotten to tell us about? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you think you know about the past.